Hi. Yes, my name is Auður Jónsdóttir. I'm a writer, and this is, of course, Pedro, and he is one of my favorite writers after reading his book, Lunga. Lunga is a family story, but a very colorful family story. And first, I want to ask just one question, because Lunga is also much more than a family story. I have a lot of questions that will describe that better. But why did you choose the title Lunga?
Well, I went to Romania to do research for my debut, which would be called languageless in English, Málleysingarnir. And I was there at a language seminar with people from all over the world, and making friends and having a great time. And was surprised by how difficult the Romanian language was to master, having some background in other Romance languages, mostly due to the fact that I was hungover all the time, because we used to go out in the evenings. But at some point, I went with my friend to meet his friend, a woman. We were just popping into an apartment to collect something, not drugs, I can't remember what it was, but he introduced me to this lady, and her name was Simona Lungu. And I thought, wow, that's such a beautiful name, Lungu, like lungs. And so that has been in the back of my mind since then. But then when I started to write this novel, I needed to justify my choice somehow. So I connected it to a bunch of different things, and it has a micro and a macro meaning. And in the micro sense, it's the organ itself, in living and breathing people, and it's directly connected to their fates. There are people that have respiratory diseases, and COVID also found its way somehow into the story. There's a story about asbestos, which of course damages lungs. And then I found myself compelled to make lungs something bigger than that. So on the macro level, which would be, I've always had a hard time coping with the fact that the universe will end in heat death. It's the ultimate pessimism that the universe will end in endless blackness and cold and an eternity of nothing. And so I read this theory that's been debunked, unfortunately, but we still have a long ways to go about understanding the universe, so this might be true about the cosmos being something that, breathes in and breathes out. So like this was an idea of cosmic lungs, which is much more beautiful, like an organ, like a heartbeat or a lung that takes in a breath and then collapses and expands again. And so, but it all comes from seeing that one beautiful woman in Romania.
Whoa. Okay, something great will happen also, I guess, next time you see a beautiful woman. But
insanely, I went on a date last night. The first date that I went on for a long time, because I've been struggling to finish. You know about this, translating this novel. So yes. I deleted all my dating apps, and so I re-uploaded them recently. And I went to meet this young woman, and she hadn't read my books, and then she told me, well, yeah, my grandfather did this odd thing. He's nearing the end of his life, and he decided to write like a family story because they have connections to Finland, and he wanted to preserve them, and so he gave it to me and my sister to read. And I'm like, but that's the plot of Lungs. How can this be? Am I meeting the person that I told you, you're the protagonist of my story? Well, no pressure on a first date, but.
Pedro is a great storyteller, and he just starts, and he's telling so big and colorful stories, and one can sense that in his novel Lungu. I interviewed him for a newspaper here in town, and I mentioned writers like Günter Grass and Gabriel Garcia Marquez because I instantly started to think about these big, colorful storytellers while I was reading Lungu. And this is, like I said, it's a great family story, but it's not a traditional family story in many ways. You have this, you are sensing somehow that a mysterious man is somehow writing this story while you're reading it. And it takes place in many, in 3 countries or 4 countries, I don't remember. And also it wanders in time. And I thought about boundary when I was preparing for this interview. A boundary is a limit or edge that defines you as separate from others. And in this story, there are no boundaries in time or between countries. It's just all over. Still, it's like the people are separated from others. Do you know what I mean? Can you?
Yeah. Well. This is my second book, and in both cases, I've only realized afterwards what I was trying to get into words. And something that they both have in common was that I've only been touched twice by a critique that somebody wrote. Well, I've been annoyed a lot of times, but I've only been touched twice. And they had the same comment. For my debut, it was some guy that was working in a bookstore, and he wrote like a little blurb on Instagram. And then recently there was this book blog that wrote like a very, like you, very generous, so generous, many of these reviews. But both of them mentioned that these are books about loneliness. And that was a shock to me. Because is it a book about loneliness? Are both of my books about loneliness? And then it kind of dawns on me slowly that, yeah, it's like a lot of people that don't have the level of intimacy that they need or a level of emotional support that they need. And so I guess that's, my neurosis just feeding into the work without it being my intention. It's just, how I perceive the world in a way.
Yeah, the feeling is that the world is packed with adventures and colors, but the people are lonely. And they are like, separated. Like I said, I don't remember if I said it or not, but the story takes place in the past, in the future, now, and you're wandering in time, and it takes place in Toscana, Toronto, Reykjavík. Am I forgetting?
South of France.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this I know you are half Portuguese. But it's like a very colorful view of the world, how you write. It's like everything is just blending, and it's like a wholeness, or has it something to do with your life vision or how you see the world?
Yeah, well, having family from 2 different places, you perceive the world, I guess, in a different sense, in a different way. And in my case, I feel I would have been lying in these books if I didn't incorporate a sense of something else than Icelandic, or what we think of like a traditional Icelandic society. If I only focused on those topics and themes, I would feel that I was being dishonest with myself and my subject matters. This is, of course, very self-centered because, I have something else, so my books need to be like me, have something else, or take place in a different setting. But it feels very natural to me. I have a 5-year-old son, and I can see like the tomorrow of Iceland will be a very multicultural place, and it is becoming a more multicultural place than many realize, and it isn't exactly reflected in a lot of Icelandic literature, but I feel like it should be, and without it being exactly my intention. I didn't wake up and say, I'm going to write a multi-generational epic that's multicultural, and I'm going to think about what that means to Icelandic society. It is what I know, and so it found a place in there.
it's a bit chaotic here. When I started to read this book, I started to think about magic realism. I thought actually it was a similar feeling as when I started to read Isabel Allende or Gabriel Garcia. But after a while, it's more realistic. It's realistic, but more like adding magical elements. And it's like that you have magic realism, but then the writer takes the magic realism and grounds it. Do you know what I mean? You make it somehow very logical, the magic.
Yeah, well, you can't escape like Nordic depression. So of course it's going to, like gravity, it's going to pull you back to earth. Well, I started out making schemes for this novel, and it wasn't supposed to have any elements of what you would call magical realism. I'm not sure that this would fall into that category, but it's definitely influenced by magical realism. Well, this is, of course, the definition is of a time and a place where I'm not from there, and I didn't live at that time, but I'm definitely influenced by these authors that you mentioned. But I was struggling with how to tell a story which in its core is about human relations and especially family connections. And I had these schemes and kind of maps and vague personalities, and I was going to talk about, like, this is going to be about intimacy and stuff. But nothing was happening on the pages until I read a couple of authors that kind of inspired me, and one of them was, I read House of Spirits for the first time, and through by Allende, and that really, so I found the tone that kind of let me into the story. Like, I found the door to enter this vague castle that I had in my mind.
But in the end, it's more like maybe it starts with magic realism, but in the end, it's a bit like science fiction.
Yeah. Well, let me just add to how like, I would maybe use the word fantasy or flights of fantasy rather than magical realism, because I'm not comfortable with that term applying to myself. But I was stuck, and I had like these tragic things and sad things, and it was written at a difficult period of my life. I was going through a separation, and then COVID hit, and I was kind of very much alone, dealing with very heavy subject matters, and I couldn't get started on this story. But then I was reminded of a story that my grandfather told me. My grandfather in Portugal told me the story about his father, who had been in the Portuguese military at the outbreak of World War I. And he was supposed to be sent to the war zone, I guess it was in Flanders in Belgium, and he didn't feel up for the challenge. And my grandfather told me the story that he swallowed a lot of raw, unripe olives with the stones and everything, and then went to the military doctor complaining of stomach pains. And they took him to the x-rays and found that he had shadows in his organs, and this was diagnosed as terminal cancer at the final stages, so he was excused from military service. And most of the Portuguese that went to Flanders were gassed to death by the Germans. So if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't be standing here today. But this, of course, has elements of like the fantastical to it. It's such a odd way to escape death, to swallow olives. And breaking down the word in Icelandic, it's ólífur. And it works in English, like oh lives. And so how is this not a story to tell? And so that was also a very important moment for me to like enter this story. Like I'm going to, and then of course I make it's more farcical and for laughs rather than like the seriousness of the actual family story.
But yeah, you can sense so much joy in your writings, or one can sense that.
I don't know where people get this from because
yeah.
there's no joy writing it.
Yeah, and you start to think, one starts to think about different genres and so on, but it's also time. It's like everything is happening at the same moment. Like you have difficult things in dimensional space, but everything is connected somehow. Is linear time, how do you sense time? Is linear
Yes,
time
I was almost late to my own event. So like I don't have a great sense of time.
How do you, when you write a story like this, how do you sense time, people in time?
Uh, well, so the challenge of what I had in my mind before starting to write it was just to try out this form of generational stories, like a family epic, and I was very aware of like this link or chain that we have throughout, connecting us to previous generations and the ones coming after us. Because just as I was starting to write this, I had a son, and all of my grandparents more or less got very sick and then ultimately died at the same time. So that scope of a life in time was something that was very apparent to me at that time. So, but time is not evenly dispersed in this novel, I would say, because I feel like the first 100 pages are to trick you into thinking this is a fun story and you're along for some kind of adventure. And then the real story starts. I would say like the real backbone of the story pertains to Alex and his parents and his stepmother. And so most of the time goes into telling that story. So much like in the future story, there's a woman that's trying to tell the story of what the fate of the universe will be, like the journey until the end of time. And she needs to go at different speeds because so much interesting stuff happens in the next years, and then we have just a lot of time with decaying black holes. So you don't want to spend too much time with the decaying black holes, and you want to see more slowly what the fate of the Earth will be. So you need to adjust time to focus on what's interesting to a certain period, and that also applies to how I told this story, but kind of in reverse, because I think I start going quite fast in a more farcical, light-handed manner, and then when I reach what I feel is like the emotional core, then time slows down, and we're introduced to this character Alex, and that's where kind of the story kind of is fully grounded, and time slows down as well.
But in the end, there is this strange feeling. I don't want to tell you about the end, but in these last pages, you have this feeling. I had this feeling like I was reading music, and it had something to do with time. Everything was there at the same moment. So that gives the whole story somehow new meaning.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned music, because I write to music a lot, and I realized something just the other day, and this is not a fully formed idea, but it amuses me. There's something about the structure of the story that reminds me of, so I like the Beach Boys a lot. And I like the Beach Boys after they'd stopped being hit makers, and they were all kind of burned out by doing a lot of acid, and they wrote this weird pop music. And there's one song that's called Surf's Up, and it is kind of baroque, teenage pocket like symphony, and it's kind of tortured, beautiful, and then in the end, these huge harmonies come in at the same time and just wash over you like some kind of celestial. It's like you're shot out into the cosmos through like the and it's something that kind of makes me cry to listen to. There's like this childlike warmth and beauty and pain. I guess it's maybe loneliness that kind of explodes. And I think maybe in the end of this book, I was trying to reach a similar effect. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else than to me, but I feel like that was the emotional effect I was striving for, something that I feel when I listen to that type of music that moves me.
Yeah. You have talked about intimacy, and because I was talking about magic realism and stuff like that, but you have this. What is very special about this book is that you describe intimacy in a very intimately way. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Are you referring to the fact that there are so many sex scenes in the book?
No, it's in so much details.
I know.
Don't become shy. It reminded me of female writers I know who are very intimate in their writings, and it really gave me a lot just to read about all the little details in people's communication in this book. Nándin var svo fulla nánd.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. And I feel that's just a natural way to look at human relationships. And I just wonder where that comes from. If it's some kind of attempt at therapeutic writing that somehow happens or not. But the intimacy thing, well, to rewind a little bit, it was written at, so I'm speaking for a man who's not here anymore, because this is a work written by a different person. And I think this book was in some ways, when people ask me, well, is it therapeutic when you write? Does it help you like transform your shit into gold? And no, I still have a lot of shit, but I have this gold, but it's separate from my shit that's still on me. But afterwards, I do think that it served as some kind of bridge between two different people. And so I'm speaking for a man that's no longer with us. But he was going through a very difficult time and going through a very painful breakup in a period where we were all self-isolating as well. And in isolation, what was lacking was intimacy and this kind of human interaction and connection. So I guess what I needed and didn't get found its way into my writing, and also you go through a separation, you lose something very dear to you, which is another person that you love and you hate, but you see the hate for a long time, but then you slowly realize, well, there was a lot to love as well, and so I think these were somewhat like the relationship parts were to do with that, but then there are scenes of intimacy between like different types of people. There's a father and a daughter. There's like other kinds of mostly family relationships.
You have a lot of characters, and you are showing intimacy between a lot of different kind of intimacy through the whole story.
Well, I'm quite poor, and I don't afford to go to a therapist, so.
But do you find intimacy when you're writing?
Well, I would say that maybe I'm driven by a need to explore these things, and when I'm asked how I create characters, because they're like somewhat diverse in different respects, but they're all formed initially by a type of problem that I have, like in a relationship or due to some kind of pain, and I transport that part of me into this person, and then they like develop another they add characteristics and they become more fully formed, and then they become fully their own person that has nothing to do with me, but the thing that they're dealing with, or the thing that they kind of embody, is something that was initially some kind of neuroses or complex or a pain coming from my own heart. And it also bothers me because it's very draining, I think, to write in this way, where you kind of need to invest in a work in such an emotional way. And since I wrote this, I was approached by this audiobook service that wanted me to write for them. And I said, well, I'm not sure that I can do like something off the cuff. But they said, oh, well, you can write under a pseudonym. Would you like to write under a pseudonym? And I was like, yeah, that would be fun. I could just do something very light and for fun and get a little bit of money. And then they said, yeah, well, there's always demand for crime and erotica. Well, interesting. Erotica under a pseudonym, that's perfect. And then I sat down and I had this 3-page summary of a story that I wanted to write, and sat down, oh, this is going to be nice. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened, and I wondered if it was to do with the fact that it didn't mean anything to me on a personal level. And that's very uncomfortable to know that I can't write unless I'm processing some kind of pain. Is that this the only thing that I'm capable of doing? But also, it just didn't offer me enough money. So it's a combination of these two things.
Yeah, lack of pain and money.
Yeah.
You have also been translating, and there is one thing I just want to mention, that is that you are so gifted with just the language, playing with the language. And now you translated this book. It was just published yesterday or something in Icelandic by Tavares. And it is written in, you told me in not so traditional Portuguese, or can you, yeah.
Yeah, no, so the style is very peculiar, and even in Portuguese, it's an odd way to phrase. He utilizes an odd, peculiar way to phrase things and what he focuses on. And I took on this challenge because I've felt bad about not being as connected to Portugal as I should be. I was very young when my parents separated, and there's been a disconnect, and I've tried to establish a stronger connection as I grow older. But I don't live there, and I have like a limited connection to the country, but I enjoy the people and the culture. And so I was approached with this challenge, and I said, yeah, well, I can like prove it to myself that I can actually do this. So it had a more of a personal meaning than translating, anything else. And then I sat down and I started translating it, and I had to stop and like, well, is this what he's saying? And I needed to compare it to other translations that I had and say, yes, that's in fact what he's saying. But what an odd thing to say. Why is he saying this? Why is he focusing on this? And there was like a lot of that going on. I just couldn't believe. But it was an interesting, fun challenge. And then I met the author, and he's a very nice man. But I'm very relieved that this is over, because this was like it needed to happen before this festival, so there was a lot of insane hours towards the end.
But you play a lot and very lively with the language. Do you like? Is it like a hobby to translate, or is it the same feeling as just writing your own stories? Do you have that? Do you find the same pleasure in translating as writing your own story?
Yeah. I derive a lot of pleasure from. I guess even well, it comes always back to joy and pleasure. Like, there's no joy in writing. There's no joy in writing. But in translating, maybe. you're freer to. For me, it's like a game of Tetris. You have these words that fall down, and you need to put them into place. And then when they fit, if you remember this game with these blocks fell down, and you organize them, and then when they fit, they vanish, and then, oh, okay, on to the next sentence. So it's very similar to that. And what I heard recently from a friend of mine who is living abroad in the States, and she told me that they have firefighters play Tetris with the sound off in order for them to cope better with their experiences. And this is by the recommendation of a psychologist. So I guess in a way, doing translations for me is the same way. It's the subconscious is there, and it's processing things, and it's met with these kind of abstract challenges, and I guess it's healing in a way too. It's a very healing to see obstacles removed in a very visceral way. It's a beep, 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 and you get a lot of points.
One thing I want you to read a bit, and we want. I think everybody wants to hear a bit from your book. But can you first tell me about this cover, this photo?
Yeah, well, I very much regret this cover now because I've changed my mind about AI since I made the cover. Well, this was made with a software called Midjourney, and there's another one called DALL-E, and it's one of these text-to-image softwares that's AI. And so I was playing around with this a year ago. It was like, it very much puts you into connection with your God complex, because you can literally say, let there be light, and there's light. And you type a command or a prompt, as they say, and the AI will give you an image of whatever you desire. And so I played for a while, and I made, I guess, over 100 different tentatives for a cover. And for this one, I think the prompt was something like cosmic lungs in the style of Renoir. And but since then, it's alarming, because like within just the span of this 1 year, the discussion and heaviness of the reality of AI has kind of got a new meaning since then. So well, I indulged in it, and I enjoyed it. But now I kind of like, I guess a lot of us are kind of a little bit scared of the uncertainty of what AI will ultimately mean to us as a species. But it's very nice to play God. But then maybe your creations will overtake you.
Do you feel like God while you're writing? Or when you're writing?
Well, I think I'm a very benevolent God, but I cause a lot of suffering. But it is my own suffering. Well, is that what God did with Jesus, though? Yeah, maybe I do feel like a God. Let's just say yes, for short.
Okay, but dear God, would you like to read a bit?
Do we have the translation on the screen somewhere?
No.
Oh, okay, yeah. Is this my... All right. Well, I forgot. I don't know what I was supposed to read. Where do I start? No. The villagers had celebrated. Okay. Hvað ég lesa? Konungur kjúklingum. Well, I'm gonna do this standing up. Sveitungarnir lofsungu hetjuna en áttu eftir að éta hrósið ofan í sig jafn harðan. Því skömmu síðar varð Júpíter kynþroska og fór að ásækja hænsnakofa í nærliggjandi sveitum með enn meira fjaðrafóki en nokkur vargur hefði geta valdið. Sjáiði, æpti einn úr sveitina meðan hann hélt á hænufæti og dinglaði fyrir framan nefið á ömmu og afa, fjaðraklessu sem rétt svo hékk saman eftir aðfarir Júpíters. Sjáiði hvað hann gerði við hænurnar mínar. Ástandi varð ekki lengi, því eftir aðeins nokkra vikur hafði Júpíter gert út allar hænur á svæðinu. Fuglahald lagðist af á svæðinum hríð. Hænuleysið angaraði unghanan og nætur mátti heyra Júpíter upp á fjalli gala yfir dalina, löngum korrandi gráti sem hljómaði eins og harmsöngur og þegar morgnaði heyrðist í honum gala svo hraustlega að sumir sögðu að í rétti vindátt heyrðist ómurinn alla leið til Akureyrar. Drengurinn fylgdist gramur með vinu sínum, ástsjúka, án þess að skilja til fullnustu tilfinningarnar sem þjökuðan. Því þótt Júpíter hefði tekið út líkamlegan þroska með hraði, var Páll enn barn og gramdist hið nýtilkomna, lostafulla ofbeldis eðli hanans. Verri var þó ígi hanans sem hljóp upp í bíla og dældaði hliðarnar á þeim með gogginum. Unglingspiltar gerðu sér að leik að keyra lötur hægt fram hjá bænum og bíða eftir að trillti haninn kæmi á harða hlaupum á eftir þeim. Þessi leikur hætti að vera sniðugur þegar Júpíter var orðinn á stærð við fílsunga. Eitt skiptið ollan því að bíll hafnaði ofan í skurði og hann hefði trúlega goggað dalvísku drengina sem sátu fastir innan í bílnum til ólífis ef loftpúðinn hefði ekki þanist út og fælt hann burt. Júpíter var frægur og ekki leið á löngu þar til fréttamenn komið með myndavélar og ótal spurningar en fólkið á bænum hélt sögun eldinguna út af fyrir sig. Og í heimsmetabókinni stóð bara að vísindamenn teldu að vöxturinn helgaðist af offramleiðslu hormóna í heiladingli. Sá kvittur fór engu að síður á kreik að á Íslandi væri stundar tilraunir með erfðabreytt matvæli, sem í þá daga var varla meira en vísindaskáldskapur, en ótti almennings víða veröld við afleiðingar slíkrar framleiðslu var margt mótaður af Júpíter, hinum gigantíska og gargantúska, konungi kjúklingana.
We have time for maybe 2 questions, something like that. Somebody somewhere. Chop, chop.
Hi, my name is Sigurður. I've just started reading your first book just this morning, so I haven't gone far. But I was really curious about this connection to Romania. I hope I'm allowed to ask a question about the other book, Mállýsingarnir. I've been really drawn into it, and why Romania, and why this? Because you had to go there, and that is my question.
Yeah. Well, so I'm gonna just explain why I wrote Mállýsingarnir in the first place, I guess, in order to answer this question. And I'd been really frustrated with my life. I'd never found the creative outlet that I kind of needed in order to function as a human being. And then it took like a very special kind of trauma for me to decide to take the chance, because I've been very shy to make this transition of, like, I didn't function as a normal human being because, like, I feel I should be an artist, and that's like a normal thing for me to do that. So, but I was shy to announce that to the world. But then I got this. One day I woke up with tinnitus in my ears, and I'd been playing in a band called Satan, and playing in a band called Satan will damage your hearing. And I was alarmed by this fact of my body being damaged and never being able to experience silence again. And so I thought, what am I living? What am I suffering for? I might as well, make my dream come true and write a novel. And so I felt, well, the debut, like I read the debut, it should be like me. It should be half something else than Icelandic and then half Icelandic and then a mixture of these two. So the form of the book is very self-centered. It's just a mirror image of me. But in order to distance myself, I needed to choose a different country than Portugal. And interestingly, these countries have a lot in common. The languages are very similar. The word eu, is spelled the same way, even though it's pronounced slightly different. And these were two different no, not limits, but the separate ends of the Roman Empire at the time. So I thought, well, maybe that will serve as like a surrogate country. And then by chance, I was found out there was a seminar for university students for free. And so I went there and I tried to learn the language and learn about the history. And so, of course, I needed to ground it very well because it's a story that's very fantastical and grotesque. So it starts out very bleakly realist, I think. Well, that was my intention. And then it slowly goes down like Alice in Wonderland, enters this different realm of reality where there are speaking animals and mad scientists and the like. So, of course, I was very interested in the story of Romania and its insane, cruel dictator who had a very odd personality and this gigantic administrative building, House of the People, that is the second largest administrative building after, I think, the Pentagon or something, for a country that has nowhere near the same GDP. And they don't know what to do with that building. And it was filled with secret tunnels throughout all of Bucharest. Sorry for going long on this.
Time is just passing. We have to leave the room now.
Okay.
Yeah, continue a bit and then we...
Yeah, to summarize, I just felt a strong need for some reason to have something else rather than Icelandic reality in the book. Yeah.
Okay. Just run. No, yes, we don't have more time, so thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
And thank you for a very good question. It was really good to talk as well about Málleysingarnir. Yes, I just know that we have to finish this now. So just thank you all for being here and listening. And
yeah, thanks for coming.